Next, we arrived at the net capital outflows equal to trade balance, which is a relationship between net exports and the relationship between savings and investment. In the small open economy, we have three assumptions. We assume that output is fixed, that consumption is positively related to disposable income, and investment is negatively related to the real interest rate. So moving over to our first example of fiscal expansion at home. This would be an example of it as if government spending were to increase. With assuming an unchanged real-world interest rate, investment would remain the same. Therefore, savings would fall below investment, and some investment would now have to be financed from going abroad. So because of this, this thus shifts the national saving schedule to the left, as you can see here, from S1 to S2. And this will actually result in a trade deficit at the real-world interest rate. For our next example, in the shift in the investment schedule, an outward shift in the investment schedule from IR1 to IR2 increases the amount of investment at the real world interest rate. As a result, investment now exceeds savings, which means that there will also be a trade deficit, as we saw in example 1. Okay.
In the second part of Chapter 6, we looked at the real exchange rate and how it is determined. The real exchange rate is determined by the intersection of the vertical line representing saving minus investment and the downward sloping net export schedule. At this intersection, the quantity of dollars supplied for the flow of capital abroad equals the quantity of dollars demanded for the net export of goods and services. On this graph, you can see three effects that it has on the real exchange rate. These three are expansionary fiscal policy at home, increase of an investment demand, and the protectionist trade policies. In all three cases, you can see that it causes net exports to fall, which raises the real exchange rate. All of these three cases have the same effect, except for the monetary exchange expansion abroad. You can see on the table that in each of these cases, in a floating economy, in a floating exchange rate system for fiscal expansion, exchange rates increase, but in a monetary expansion, the exchange rates decrease. In protectionist trade policies, exchange rates increase. However, in a fixed exchange rate system, net exports are zero in both fiscal expansion and monetary expansion, but in trade policies for protectionist, the net exports increase.
So in Chapter 13, we constructed the Mundell-Fleming model in order to examine the impact of various policies. The Mundell-Fleming model is a dominant policy paradigm for studying open economy, monetary, and fiscal policy. And the key assumptions that we want to make are that we're working with a small open economy with perfect capital mobility, and that the interest rate is fixed and determined by the world interest rate. So if you look here at the construction of the Mundell-Fleming model, it's a graph that plots the goods market equilibrium, the IS curve, versus the money market equilibrium, which is the LM curve. And they are drawn holding the interest rate constant at the world interest rate, which is the equilibrium interest rate. So continuing from that, the intersection of these two curves shows the level of income and the exchange rate that satisfy equilibrium both in the goods market and in the money market. So this first example that we're looking at is an example of a fiscal expansion under floating exchange rates. So an increase in government purchases or a decrease in taxes shifts the IS curve to the right, which in turn will raise the equilibrium exchange rate, but income will be held constant. So this second example looks at a monetary expansion under floating exchange rates, and it shows an increase in money supply from LM1 to LM2 will in turn lower the equilibrium exchange rate and also increase output. So this third example looks at a fiscal expansion under fixed exchange rates. So with a fixed exchange rate, fiscal expansion shifts the IS curve to the right, which induces a shift in the money supply. So LM1 to LM2, and it will in turn raise the equilibrium income.